We moved on to Baby Blue on July 3rd, 2014. She came with a mooring in Rockport, Maine, so Penobscot Bay became our cruising training ground as we spent the summer learning to sail our new boat.
Before this, my only sailing experience was on dinghies in my 21-foot McGregor venture, mostly on small lakes in upstate New York.
Growing up in Colorado, I had never sailed at all and could count on one hand the number of times I'd even been aboard a boat. But when John told me his dream of going cruising aboard a small sailboat, I was sold on the idea as the perfect way to travel, and in my ignorance, wholeheartedly began planning our escape from normal life.
6 years later, after getting married, paying off all our debt, saving as much as we could, and remodeling our old house, we were finally able to quit our jobs. We then sold nearly all of our belongings and started our search for an affordable, seaworthy boat that could take us on our big adventure.
Here we are in Rockport, Maine, aboard Reprise, soon to be renamed, and the new name of our boat is still in the works. But we wanted to give you a very quick, maybe 60-second tour of our boat. And we will go inside, through the cockpit, into the companionway. And as I step down in here, we are already in our kitchen, or the galley. I'll turn around and you can see how small it is. To the left there we have a little ice box. It's very deep, it goes almost down to the floor. And then on the right we have the tiniest little sink you've ever seen. And you see that where I just stepped down and put my foot is actually our counter. So we use that as a cutting board. Just kidding, we don't. That's gross. And then here's the oven. Stove is underneath there, it flips up. 3 burners, more storage in the back. And then if we move on down, we are already in our little living room area. So this little table here, it flips up if you want a larger table, or it sinks all the way down to be even with that little cushion there, and you can make a pretty comfortable bed. It fits 2. So that's where you'd have to stay if you ever wanted to stay with us. So if we keep going to the front of the boat, there's our bedroom, called the V berth because it is shaped in a V. We do have a little closet looking back toward the back of the boat. Cute little anchors on it. And then if you look back over here is the restroom. Just not much to see here, I guess. It's very small. You can basically just stand in it to reach the sink and the toilet. And there's some storage back there. Definitely some things that we want to change. But for now, this is how we're living for the next couple of months probably. In a hurry to get out of Maine before the cold hit and the nor'easters began, we didn't do the best job of picking a weather window for our first passage. But we didn't know any better and thought that the forecast for waves building to 8 to 12 feet wouldn't be that big of a deal. I remember taking this video around 11 a.m. on the second day, when everything was still manageable and we were optimistic that we could make it in before dark. But from then on, conditions worsened. Our self-steering wind vane wasn't holding its course with the following seas, so by the end of the day, John had been steering for about 18 hours without a break. All he could see around him was water. The horizon was obscured by waves. We wish we would have gotten a video of the waves at their worst, since it really doesn't look like much is happening here. But we were way beyond that kind of thinking by that time, so you'll just have to take my word for it. It was terrifying.
We didn't make it into the harbor until 9 p.m., totally drenched and exhausted. I felt awful for having put us in such a bad situation on our first passage. Determined not to repeat this experience, we have been much more careful about picking our weather windows for sailing. We've made it all the way down to the Caribbean without experiencing conditions nearly as bad as in the Gulf of Maine that day.
After our rough passage, we had time to let the boat dry out and to get our wits about us when John's sister and her family came to visit in Provincetown. A few days later, we set off again on a course toward the Cape Cod Canal.
Cape Cod to Block Island today. We're heeling over here pretty good, but making good progress. Get a little video of what it's like to be inside the boat when we're moving along out here. Making good use of our gimbaled stove. I've got some water on. I'm going to try to make some lunch here, see if I can do it without scalding ourselves. Here's Ashley, feeling a little green today.
We knew we hadn't timed the current perfectly for this section of the East River known as Hell Gate, but we didn't want to wait until the next day and figured we could probably make it through anyway. It took longer to get to this point than we'd expected, so instead of getting there at slack tide, we ended up with the current fully against us, going about 1 knot, watching as people passed us walking on the street above.
I had planned to record our entire journey down the river, but going as slow as we were, the camera's batteries died before we made it very far at all. So let's fast forward a little.
I had been to New York City before, but it was really impressive to see it from the water. We sailed around Manhattan and up the Hudson where we stayed at the 79th Street Boat Basin. It was Ashley's first time in New York City, and we were both having a great time right in the middle of it all. We were having so much fun hanging out with my little brother Cody and my friend Aaron, and we stayed for almost a week. We would have loved to stay longer, but the weather was getting colder.
By November, we were getting quite tired of freezing cold passages, so we were overjoyed to arrive at the beginning of the Intracoastal Waterway. Land of Coca-Cola colored rivers, locks and bridges, canals, and, let's be honest, ditches. It meant that if we wanted to, we could avoid any offshore passages all the way down to Florida. We thought that since we were in Virginia, we might start to see some warmer weather. We thought the same thing about North Carolina, and then South Carolina. We also didn't realize how nerve-wracking it would be to navigate the at times too shallow water of the ICW. But the trade-off of being able to make tracks south through just about any conditions was worth it, and each new river we traveled was more beautiful and serene than the last.
After traveling for many days on the ICW, we were feeling pretty confident navigating the shallow and narrow waterways. Near Camp Lejeune, while distracted by some training exercise involving helicopters and a lot of smoke, I wasn't paying enough attention to some oddly placed markers. We felt a couple alarming thuds and then came to an abrupt stop in the middle of the ICW. Luckily, after kedging out the anchor and using the jib to heel the boat over, we were able to get off the sandbar without having to call for a tow. We were quickly back in deep water and didn't end up looking like this guy.
After a month on the ICW, we were ready to head offshore again and left from Charleston, South Carolina. We ended up totally becalmed on the second day and decided just to float around and wait for wind, thinking of our limited fuel supply. So one overnight became two. We came back into the ICW a little farther north than anticipated to fuel up, and then motored down to St. Augustine. It wasn't until a month later that we realized our fuel tank held twice as much as we thought. When the fuel gauge indicated we were empty, we were actually still half full, and could have motored through the calm instead of floating the ocean an extra night. We spent almost a month in West Palm Beach, making our final preparations before leaving the country, not knowing exactly how far away we would end up or when we would return.